Is this some kind of joke? The voice was young, sharp, and coated in a thick layer of contempt. It belonged to a man named Kyle, the owner of Tactical Advantage Armory, a gun shop so modern and sterile it felt more like a showroom for military-grade hardware than a place for hobbyists. He stood with his arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips as he looked down at the woman standing before his glass counter. "Can I help you, ma'am? Or are you just here for the air conditioning?" Sienna Cade, 39 years old, did not react. Her posture was straight but not rigid, her movements economical. She wore a simple, worn leather jacket over a dark Henley shirt, her hands resting gently on the countertop. She had been quietly examining a display of vintage firearm cleaning kits, her gaze lingering on a particular set of brass jags and brushes. She finally looked up from the display, her hazel eyes meeting Kyle's. "I'm looking for a recoil spring guide for a 1911 A1, Sienna said, her voice low and even. "An original from the mid-2000s if you have one, or something period correct." Kyle let out a short, derisive laugh. A couple of younger customers decked out in tactical gear and operator beards snickered along with him. "A 1911? Seriously, lady, that's a museum piece. Why don't you get with the times? I can set you up with a modern polymer frame lighter, higher capacity, something you can actually handle without breaking a nail." He winked at his friends. "Or maybe something in pink. We've got a few options for the ladies." Sienna's expression didn't change. She simply waited, her patience a silent, immovable wall. "I'm not here for a new pistol," she said evenly. "I'm here for the part." The owner's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of irritation. This woman wasn't playing her part. She was supposed to be flustered, easily intimidated, a target to be mocked and dismissed. Instead, she just stood there, her quiet dignity a subtle rebuke to Kyle's performance. "Look, we don't carry junk parts for ancient firearms," Kyle snapped, his voice rising. "This is a high-end establishment. We cater to serious shooters, not—" He looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "Not housewives looking to patch up their husband's old sidearm." He leaned forward, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial, insulting tone. "Frankly, you don't look like our typical clientele. Does your husband even know you're here?" A hush fell over the small group of onlookers. The insult was blatant, a direct dismissal based on nothing but her gender and appearance. Sienna Cade slowly reached into her back pocket and pulled out a slim card holder, the kind that had been folded and unfolded so many times the leather was soft as cloth. She opened it with deliberate, unhurried movements. Kyle's impatience boiled over. "I don't have time for this. You're holding up my actual customers. Either buy something modern or get out." Sienna didn't look up from her wallet. She was searching for her driver's license, her fingers carefully navigating the familiar slots. The simple act of her taking her time seemed to enrage the shop owner further. It was a rejection of the fast-paced, high-pressure world Kyle had built for himself. "Did you hear me?" Kyle's voice was a sharp crack in the quiet store. He gestured toward the door with a flick of his head. "I want you to leave now. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." Sienna finally found her license and placed it on the counter. Her hand was steady. There was no tremor of fear or anger. There was only a profound sense of weariness, a disappointment that felt ancient. Kyle didn't even glance at the ID. He was on a power trip now. Fueled by the attention of his small audience, he saw that her jacket was slightly unzipped, revealing the simple cotton of her dark shirt. He noticed something pinned to the faded inner lining of the leather, a small, tarnished piece of metal shaped like a star. It looked cheap, like something from a thrift store. "What's that piece of junk you got there?" Kyle sneered, pointing. "Did you win a prize at a craft fair?" As Kyle spoke, he reached out, intending to shove Sienna toward the door. His thumb brushed against the old leather of the jacket, pressing for a moment against the small, hard shape of the metal star pinned inside. The sterile smell of gun oil and air conditioning vanished. For a split second, the world dissolved into a cacophony of sound and sensation. The deafening roar of small arms fire, the high-pitched scream of an RPG streaking overhead, the taste of desert sand and cordite filling her mouth. She felt the crushing weight of a teammate on her back, the warm, sticky wetness seeping through her own uniform in the brutal 120-degree heat of an Iraqi compound. A memory flashed behind her eyes. A commanding officer, his face grim and dust-covered, pressing that same small, cold piece of metal into her palm. A voice, strained with exhaustion and respect, cut through the noise of battle. "You earned this, Sergeant. You saved them all." Then, just as quickly, the vision was gone. Sienna was back in the gun shop, Kyle's hand on her arm, the owner's sneering face just inches from her own. The tarnished silver star beneath her jacket felt impossibly heavy. Kyle shoved her a hard, jarring push that sent her stumbling back a step. "I said, get out, now." In a quiet corner of the shop, partially hidden behind a rack of overpriced tactical vests, a young man had been watching the entire exchange. He was in his early 20s with a haircut so sharp and precise you could set a level to it. He wore civilian clothes, a plain t-shirt and jeans, but he stood with a ramrod-straight posture that was anything but civilian. His name was Corporal Evans, and he was 2 weeks into his leave from the Marine Corps Security Guard detachment at the American Embassy in Paris. He was just here to browse, to feel a sense of normalcy before heading back overseas. He had noticed the woman when she first walked in. He'd noticed the quiet way she carried herself, the economical and deliberate way she moved. He'd also noticed the faint, almost invisible outline of a faded patch on the shoulder of the old leather jacket, a shape he vaguely recognized from the history books at Paris Island. But it was the disrespect, the raw, undiluted contempt from the shop owner that made his blood run cold. He had seen ambassadors and foreign dignitaries treated with less ceremony, but he had never seen anyone treated with such venom for no reason. When Kyle physically shoved Sienna, something inside Corporal Evans snapped into place. It wasn't rage. It was a cold, clear sense of duty. He watched as Sienna, without a word of protest, turned and walked slowly out of the shop, the door hissing shut behind her. Kyle stood there, puffing out his chest, victorious. Evans set the magazine he was holding back on the shelf with a quiet click. He walked past the counter, giving Kyle a look so devoid of emotion it was more terrifying than any threat. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the bright sunlight of the strip mall parking lot. He saw Sienna Cade sitting on a concrete bench near the curb, not looking defeated, but simply staring at the horizon as if waiting for something that was long overdue. Evans walked over, stopping a respectful distance away. "Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet. Sienna turned her head slowly, her calm eyes settling on the young man. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Evans asked. Sienna gave a slight nod. "Just catching my breath." "What he did in there, that wasn't right," Evans said, his jaw tight. He hesitated for a second, then committed. "That patch on your jacket, is that 1st Marine Division?" Sienna's eyes flickered with a hint of surprise. "You have a good eye, son. It's been a long time since anyone's recognized that." Evans felt a jolt. 1st Marine Division. And from the looks of this woman, the way she carried herself, it wasn't from a recent peacekeeping mission. He pulled out his phone. "Ma'am, with your permission, I'd like to make a phone call. I think some people would want to know about how you were just treated." Sienna looked at the young Marine, then back at the gun shop, then back to the young man's earnest, angry face. She gave another slow nod. "Do what you feel you need to do, son." Evans stepped away and dialed a number he knew by heart. It wasn't 911. It was the duty phone for his old unit's gunnery sergeant back at Marine Corps Base Quantico, less than 30 miles down the highway. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Gunnery Sergeant Miller." The voice was pure gravel and authority. "Gunny, it's Corporal Evans." "Evans, what do you need? I thought you were on leave." "I am, Gunny, but I'm at a gun shop off Route 1, Tactical Advantage Armory, and you are not going to believe what I just saw." Evans quickly and professionally recounted the entire incident, his voice low and tight with controlled fury. He described the owner, the insults, the physical shove. He ended with the most important detail.
"Gunny, the person he threw out. She's wearing a 1st Marine Division patch. Her name is Sienna Cade."
There was dead silence on the other end of the line. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was static. When Gunnery Sergeant Miller finally spoke, his voice had lost all its gruffness. It was replaced by something else, something Evans had never heard before. "Or, say that name again." "Sienna Cade, Gunny." "Gunny." Another pause. Then the command came, sharp and absolute. "Stay right where you are, Evans. Do not let that woman leave. I don't care what you have to do. Offer to buy her lunch. Talk about the weather. Just keep her there. I'm making a call." The line went dead. Corporal Evans lowered his phone, a strange feeling blooming in his chest. He had just lit a fuse, and he had no idea how big the explosion was going to be. Gunnery Sergeant Miller stood in his small, cluttered office at Quantico, the phone still pressed to his ear. He hung it up, his hand trembling slightly. Sienna Cade, the name echoed in his mind, dredged up from dusty lecture halls and books on Marine Corps lore. It couldn't be. He didn't bother with the chain of command. He didn't call a captain or a major. He strode out of his office, his boots thumping on the linoleum with a purpose that made junior Marines flatten themselves against the walls. He walked directly to the headquarters building, past the colonels' and majors' offices, and stopped before the polished oak door of the base commander, a 2-star general. He knocked once, a sharp, authoritative rap, and entered without waiting for permission. General Morrison, a man who had led troops in Fallujah and Helmand, looked up from his desk, his eyes narrowed at the breach of protocol. "Gunnery Sergeant." "Sir, my apologies," Miller said, snapping to attention, "but I just received a call from a Marine on leave. He's at a civilian establishment in town. He's with a woman named Sienna Cade." The general's expression didn't change, but a flicker of recognition appeared in his eyes. He swiveled in his chair and typed the name into a secure terminal on his desk. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Miller, standing at attention, could just make out the top line. "Cade Sienna, Sergeant Major, retired." Below it was a list of commendations and service records so long and so heavily redacted it was almost comical. but a few key phrases were visible through the black ink. Battle of Fallujah, Ramadi offensive, conspicuous gallantry, 3 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, and another higher award whose name was obscured but whose gravity was unmistakable. General Morrison slowly turned back to face the gunnery sergeant. His face was pale. "Where did you say they were, Gunny?" "Tactical Advantage Armory, sir. The Marine reports that the owner just physically assaulted Sergeant Major Cade and threw her out of the store." The general stared at Miller for a beat, his expression hardening into something like cold granite. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Get me my driver now, and tell the ceremonial unit I want an honor guard detail assembled on the double full dress blues. We're taking a ride." Back at the gun shop, Kyle was basking in the glow of his triumph. He was regaling his friends with an exaggerated version of the encounter, painting himself as a vigilant business owner, protecting his store from a naive woman who clearly didn't belong. He glanced out the large front window and saw Sienna still sitting on the bench, now with the young, clean-cut man who had been in the store earlier. The sight of them just sitting there felt like a challenge. His ego, still soaring, demanded a final act of dominance. He stormed out the door, his friends trailing behind him. He marched up to the bench, planting himself in front of Sienna. "I thought I told you to leave," he spat. "This is private property. If you're not gone in 60 seconds, I'm calling the police and having you arrested for trespassing." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a nasty whisper. "And I'll make sure to tell them you seemed confused, disoriented. Maybe a nice trip to a psych ward will do you some good." Corporal Evans stood up, placing himself between Kyle and the woman. "I think you've said enough," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Kyle scoffed. "And who are you? Her boyfriend? Get out of my way before I have you arrested too." It was then that the sound began, a low, distant rumble that grew steadily louder. It wasn't the sound of a passing truck or a police siren. It was deeper, more resonant. It was the sound of multiple heavy-duty engines moving in perfect unison. Kyle and his friends turned to look down the road. Coming around the corner wasn't a police car.
It was a convoy.
2 black, official-looking sedans led the way, followed by 2 menacing olive-drab Humvees. They moved without sirens, without flashing lights, but with a disciplined, inexorable momentum that was far more intimidating. They pulled into the strip mall parking lot, their tires crunching on the asphalt, and formed a perfect silent semicircle blocking the entrance to Tactical Advantage Armory. The doors of the vehicles opened simultaneously. From the Humvees, a dozen Marines in immaculate dress blue uniforms disembarked. They moved with chilling precision, forming 2 perfect ranks. From the lead sedan, General Morrison emerged, his uniform bristling with ribbons and 2 silver stars gleaming on his collar. The parking lot fell silent. Traffic on the main road slowed as drivers gawked at the incredible scene. Kyle's jaw hung open, his face a canvas of confusion and dawning horror. General Morrison ignored everyone. His eyes scanned the small crowd and found the woman sitting on the bench. His entire demeanor changed. The hard-nosed commander vanished, replaced by a look of profound, almost reverent respect. He strode forward, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement, and stopped 3 feet in front of Sienna Cade. He snapped to the most rigid, perfect salute a man could execute. His voice, a commander's voice accustomed to echoing across parade grounds, boomed through the silent parking lot. "Sergeant Major Cade." "General Morrison, it is an honor, ma'am." Sienna looked up, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. She slowly, a bit stiffly, rose to her feet. The general held his salute, turning his head slightly so his voice would carry to Kyle and the stunned onlookers. "For those of you who do not know, you are in the presence of a hero of the Republic. This is Sergeant Major Sienna Cade, 1st Marine Division." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "She fought in Fallujah. She was part of the Ramadi offensive. She spent 72 hours holding a forward position against overwhelming enemy forces, saving the lives of dozens of her fellow Marines." His voice grew stronger, more intense. "The commendations she earned are too numerous to list here, but they are a testament to a level of courage most of us can only read about in books. She was awarded the Silver Star for valor in combat, one of the few women ever to receive it." As the general spoke, the honor guard on an unheard command presented arms with a single, unified slap of hands on rifles that echoed like a gunshot. The sound made Kyle flinch. The phones that had been in the pockets of the onlookers were now out, but they weren't recording a mockery, they were recording a legend. Kyle's face had gone from white to a sickly shade of green. The world had just turned upside down, and he was underneath it. The general finally dropped his salute and turned his gaze upon Kyle. The warmth and respect in his eyes vanished, replaced by an arctic cold. He walked slowly toward the shop owner, who seemed to shrink with every step the general took. "You run this establishment?" the general asked, his voice now a low, dangerous whisper. Kyle could only manage a pathetic nod. "The United States Marine Corps has a long and proud tradition of supporting local businesses," the general said, his voice dripping with ice, "especially those that cater to the needs of our servicemen and women. That support is predicated on a baseline of mutual respect. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Today, you failed that test in a spectacular fashion. You took a woman, a giant whose boots you are not worthy to polish, and you treated her like trash. He stepped even closer. As of this moment, Tactical Advantage Armory is officially and permanently blacklisted. No active duty personnel from Quantico or any surrounding installation will set foot in your store. I will personally see to it. You have disrespected a living legend, and in doing so you have disrespected the entire United States Marine Corps. Sienna Cade stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the general's arm. "General," she said softly, "that's enough." She turned and looked at Kyle, whose eyes were wide with terror and shame. There was no anger in Sienna's face, only a deep, abiding sadness. "The things you sell in that store," she said, gesturing with her head, "they're just tools. They don't make a person strong or brave. That comes from in here." She tapped her chest gently. "Respect isn't something you demand because you've got the latest gear. It's something you give freely, especially to those who have come before you. Everyone carries a history. You just have to be quiet enough to see it." As Sienna spoke, the general's eyes drifted to her jacket, which had fallen open. He saw the small, tarnished silver star pinned to the inside lining. The general knew exactly what it was. For a brief instant, as the sun glinted off the worn metal, another image filled Sienna's mind. Not of receiving a medal, but of giving one. She was younger, kneeling in the dusty rubble of a makeshift aid station in Ramadi. She was pinning her own newly awarded silver star onto the uniform of a young corporal, a woman no older than 22 who lay still and pale on a stretcher. The woman had thrown herself in front of Sienna and two others when an IED detonated. She had died before the commanders could award her own medal posthumously. So Sienna had given her hers. The star she wore now, the one Kyle had called a piece of junk, wasn't even hers. It was a replacement she'd been given later, a simple piece of metal she kept not as a trophy for her own valor, but as a humble reminder of another's sacrifice. The fallout was swift and brutal. The videos from the parking lot went viral within hours. The story was picked up by local news, then national outlets. Tactical Advantage Armory's online presence was annihilated by a tidal wave of one-star reviews and scathing comments. Kyle's serious shooter clientele, many of whom were active or former military, abandoned him overnight. No one wanted to be associated with the man who had thrown a decorated female Marine hero out of his shop. General Morrison was true to his word. An official directive was posted on every bulletin board at Quantico, formally forbidding any personnel from conducting business with the store. The financial bleeding was immediate and catastrophic. Within 3 months, Kyle was forced to liquidate his entire inventory and sell the shop at a staggering loss. 6 months later, a man who looked a lot like Kyle, but without the arrogant smirk and tactical clothing, was stocking shelves in the canned goods aisle of a local supermarket. He was stacking cans of peas when he looked up and saw a familiar figure coming down the aisle. It was Sienna Cade, pushing a shopping cart. A little boy, her grandson, was sitting in the child's seat, happily babbling away. Kyle froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to run, to hide behind a pyramid of soup cans, but there was nowhere to go. Sienna pushed her cart closer, and their eyes met. Kyle braced himself for a look of contempt, a cutting remark, or worst of all, a knowing smirk. He got none of it. Sienna Cade simply looked at him, and for a moment, the steady calm in her eyes seemed to quiet the frantic noise in his head. The former Marine gave him a short, simple nod. It wasn't a nod of forgiveness, nor of friendship. It was a nod of acknowledgement, a simple human gesture that said, "I see you." Then she continued down the aisle, listening to her grandson tell her a story about his day at preschool. Kyle stood there for a long time, a can of peas in his hand, feeling the full weight of the quiet, powerful lesson he had finally begun to understand. The story of Sergeant Major Cade is a powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear their greatness on their sleeves. True valor is often quiet, unassuming, and deserves our utmost respect. If you believe in honoring our heroes, like this video, subscribe to Veterans Past Stories, and share this story so that true courage is never forgotten.